Okay, so here's where we're at. All over YouTube, people are uploading things about reptilians, reptilian overlords, reptilian people that are made for food to be eaten by aliens who are reptiles, and that we have reptilian DNA, that we have this, that we have that, there's a race of reptilians living under the ground that are ready to come out and eat us all, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it all. But there has to be some basis to all this fanaticism on reptilians. Alright, I've seen the videos, I've seen all the world leaders with the reptile eyes and whatever. Now, there must be a reason behind this. So what I've done is I've gone and looked for the truth in the only place I know where the truth can be found, and that's in the Bible. So of course the best place to start in the Bible is at the beginning. Right? Now, if you go to Genesis chapter 3, now I'm looking at the King James Version, the verse starts, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any other beast of the field, which the Lord God hath made." So that before we even start, God's acknowledging that the serpent is subtle, and is sort of a little bit shiftier than all the rest of the animals that he's made. And here it is that the serpent comes and has a conversation with Eve. Now, how many serpents do you know can talk? I know none. None. I don't know any serpents that talk. So the Bible's already got a reference to a talking serpent. So there's one thing. Now, it talks to Eve and says to her, what? God said you can't eat from every tree in the garden? And Eve says, yeah. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, ye shall not eat, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Now lo and behold, the serpent speaks again, and he says unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. So one of two things has happened here. We've got a serpent that can talk, or a serpent that can talk. There's no two ways about it. Now, here's the thing. The woman, first he convinces Eve that she won't die. For God doth, this is verse 5, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. At that point in time, there was only one being other than God who had the knowing of the ability to know what was good and what was evil, and that was Satan, because he was evil. He was full of pride, full of himself. He'd become selfish. So there's a good chance that that tree in the midst of the garden was representative of Satan, and God said, stay away from that guy. Right? And here's the thing where a lot of Christians get undone. It talks about the fruit of the tree. Now the fruit, apart from being nourishing and edible and whatever, fruit can also be another way of talking about reproduction, because trees reproduce by bearing fruit, people reproduce by bearing fruit, women have a womb and they bear fruit, they have kids, etc., blah blah blah. I'll leave that up to you guys to fight over it. So my point of view here is that the serpent, which I believe was an evil spirit, because the physical snakes can't talk, so I'd say it was a demon that looks like a snake, or looks like a lizard, or some sort of reptilian, a reptilian. has come, started talking, a demon in the form of a reptilian, and as the dragon was thrown down to the earth in Revelation with all his angels, and they must all look like reptiles. Now, for those of you who are not convinced about the reproduction of fruit, blah blah blah, look it up yourself. But this is the thing that gets me. Verse 6 in Genesis chapter 3. And when the woman, talking about Eve, saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired. Now really, who desires a tree? Unless this is figuratively speaking of some being, whether it be Satan or whatever it is, but whatever it was, she began to lust. Now, right there and then, she began to fall, because she was already lusting with her eyes. And she found the tree desiring to make her wise. She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. Now, you can take that as literal fruit. I find that hard to believe that a piece of fruit is going to cause us to fall. I take it as a different way. I believe that they did something with Satan. Now, they partook of his fruit. I believe that she had an affair with him, and Adam as well. Now, I strongly believe that everything that's here today, every sin, began right there in the garden. Right? And it all began with lust, greed, desire, all those things. Like, she became greedy and lustful, and homosexuality started there and then as well. Everything that's here today started there. And that's my, you can argue it black and blue, day and night, but it didn't appear later. It started there and then. And then it says here, and the eyes of them both, this is in verse 7, were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Now, that in itself is a dead giveaway. I mean, really, what, they didn't know they were naked before? Well, they must have done something to realise they were naked. Maybe they were more than naked. Maybe they had just performed an act that was unholy with an unholy being, and the result is that the world is the way it is today. But the saddest part is that they performed an act with a reptilian. Because it says there that Satan is a dragon, he's a snake, he's a this. They performed an act with a reptilian. Now, to paraphrase the rest of it, God came along, and you can read it yourself, Genesis chapter 3. But then, God came and he says to Adam, what's going on? And Adam says, she made me do it. And then she turns around, Eve, and says, the serpent beguiled me and I did eat. Now, she was lied to. But besides that fact that she was lied to, she performed an act. And that screwed everything. And then Adam jumped into the act. So what am I getting at here? That the serpent beguiled her. And she did eat. She did eat. In other words, she had sexual relations with a serpent, to put it mildly. So, is there any truth to reptilians? Yes, there is. But are they aliens? No. They're spiritual beings. They're fallen angels. They're demons. And they're all through the Bible. And the Bible actually is very, very plain when it talks about the serpent. So yes, there's reptilians. Now it goes on. This is the bit that I find very, very interesting. Right, first thing God does, God speaks to the serpent. Right, so he gets this reptilian creature, and he says, "Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, above every beast of the field, and on thy belly shalt thou go." So, according to this, it looks like the reptilian had arms and legs before this, before God cursed it. So, it was a walking reptilian. But then, in verse 15, it says, "I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed." Now, that's very, very funny. He's talking about seed, right? And seed has something to do with reproduction. So he's putting enmity between the reptilians' offspring and Eve's offspring. So what's going on there? Right? Well, it goes on, which I'll go on to next. But of course they have two children, Cain and Abel. Yeah, so in Genesis 4 it shows Eve had two kids, Cain and Abel. And the way it looks here, they look like twins, because it says Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, "I've gotten a man for the Lord." And she again bare his brother Abel, so she must have had twins. And then it goes on and talks about them growing up, and how everything Cain did upset God, and everything Abel did showed God gave him favour. So there was already something happening there between the two. So Cain was obviously not getting it right, was he? But here's the thing. It goes on that Cain kills Abel. We all know this story. Cain kills Abel. And then it talks about in Genesis chapter 5. Oh yeah, so Cain kills Abel, and God marks Cain and then sends him off. You can read all this yourself. It's all there in Genesis. Right? But he marked Cain. Now, this is just my theory, but I think the mark of Cain is some reptilian mark, and you can see it, and plain as day. And it's a very, I'd say it's, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway. Okay, we all know that Cain and Abel were the firstborn, and then in Genesis chapter 4, Cain kills Abel, and then Cain is sent away. Now what happens is something funny. In chapter 5 of Genesis, God talks about the genealogy of Adam, and it tells you Adam lived 150 years. So it's in chapter 5 Genesis, and it says, "And begat a son in his own likeness and after his image, and called him Seth." So in the genealogy of Adam, because then it goes on to say Seth did this and then he begot Enos, and Enos begat Canaan, and it went on and on and on. But to cut a long story short, the generations of Adam start with Seth. Obviously they couldn't start with Abel because he's dead, but they could start with Cain because he's still alive. But according to this, Cain is not of the generations of Adam, because there's a very big hole here between verse 3 and verse 5, because Cain from what I can see here, he's not mentioned anymore after he killed his brother. But if he was Adam's son, he would still be mentioned as Adam's son. So it leaves one other possibility. That he is a reptilian child. So there is some truth to what they're saying about there may be reptilian DNA within the human race. So basically the devil's gone and fouled up the purity of humanity by getting us to interbreed with something else, which is reptilian. So you're welcome to look it up yourself. You don't have to take my word for it, but hey, in this day and age, I'd believe the Bible before I believe the hundreds and hundreds of YouTube videos. Anyway, that's it from me.